Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first of the 2025 MAIC webinars. We're very excited to be back with this series this year. We have a couple of announcements to get things started, and then we will jump into the content of our webinar. Just to start off, we want to thank everyone who attended our Research Development and Education Summit in Castine last week. That was on the 9th of January, I believe. And we had a lovely time meeting many of the aquaculture folks around the state and getting to learn about the research development needs for the industry. So that was wonderful. We also want to give a very warm and excited welcome to our new associate and executive directors. So you all know Anne Langston-Knoll. She has been a project manager and associate director at MAIC for a long time, and she is now the executive director at MAIC. And Emily Whitmore is our new associate director. And the lovely Chris Davis is still with MAIC as well. He is now the innovator in residence. So we like to say that he has gotten the best promotion possible because he gets to think about super exciting ideas all the time. So those are just a couple of changes with MAIC. We also have a couple of events that will be coming up in the next month. So we will have another episode of our EE Blue cooking series coming out sometime in February. And this episode will be focused on kelp, I believe, right, Emily? Excellent. Yeah, so keep an eye out for that. We don't have the date quite yet, but we'll make sure that all of our networks do get that date as soon as it is live. And the other thing that we'll have next month is another MAIC webinar. So that will be happening on Friday, February 21st. And the current plan is that that will be talking about a farmer-to-farmer exchange in Iceland. So keep all of those things on your mind somewhere as they're starting to pop up and you see them. Make sure to register. But without any further ado, I do want to welcome Lisa White from the Department of Marine Resources. Lisa is the program and outreach coordinator for the aquaculture division at DMR. And today she is joining us to talk about an overview of application process for aquaculture leases and licenses. And she's also going to highlight recent changes in that process. So Lisa, if you'd like to share your screen, feel free to do so, and welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. And if you'd like to get started, that's great. One thing I do want to just say before that happens, though, for any of our participants, if you have questions throughout this webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A function. You should see that at the bottom of your screen. You can type questions, and we'll get to them either during the webinar or right kind of at the end. So we will do that. And without further ado, I'm going to spotlight Lisa and take it away. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. Can you see the slide okay?
Yes, we are seeing the slide.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'm from the state of Maine Department of Marine Resources Aquaculture Division, and I'm going to focus on the leasing and licensing process in coastal waters. So a little bit about the division first. We are now part of the Bureau of Public Health and Aquaculture in DMR, and we have staff both in Augusta and in Boothbay. Like a lot of regulatory programs, we kind of have a science arm and an administrative or policy arm. So Boothbay is where our science team works out of, and the admin team, which I'm a part of, works out of Augusta. An aquaculture permitting authority in Maine is for the coastal aquaculture is primarily directed through DMR. Municipalities and other state agencies also provide input during the permitting process, and we also our applications are a joint application with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they oversee all the federal review and coordinate that with the other federal agencies. The other kind of lead state agency for typically it's just finfish would be the Department of Environmental Protection, who issues the discharge licenses for discharge sites only. And in Maine, we have 3 types of aquaculture permits in coastal waters. There's what we call an LPA, or a limited purpose aquaculture license. There's also 2 types of leases, an experimental lease or a standard lease. And a lease and a license are separate terms. So it's pretty common. People will say they have an LPA lease, but it's an LPA license. It's annually permitted annually. It's a permit by rule type license. So there are some pretty big distinctions that come with a lease versus a license. LPA sites can be up to 400 square feet, and they expire every year, December 31st. On the lease side, an experimental lease can be for up to 4 acres and for a period of up to 3 years. And a standard lease can be for up to 100 acres and a period of up to 20 years lease term. A quick snapshot of what we have for sites in Maine right now. 195 aquaculture leases are along the coast, and 673 LPA licensed sites along the coast. And here's a quick snapshot. This map's a little bit outdated, but it gives you an idea of where the leases are sort of separated along the coast. So you can see there's quite a few, excuse me, quite a few shellfish sites down in southern Maine, several of the kelp and marine algae sites in mid-coast, and finfish is primarily down east. If you want to see a closer look and explore some of the coastline, we have an aquaculture web map on the DMR website. I'm going to see if I can bring you to it, because it is a great tool in many places along the application process. So the web map is housed on the aquaculture webpage. And if you click on this icon here, it takes you can turn the layer list on and off. So you could zoom into a region on the coastline. Some things that we've added, at least recently, as there's now a layer or a polygon for applications that are under review. So they would come up as a gray polygon. There's also still the active sites. So active sites are coded in both green and yellow. The green is for any site that's not under review right now. A yellow site would be a standard site that's going through a renewal, or an experimental site that's in the process of applying for a standard lease. So while those applications are pending, they'll be coded in yellow. Other layers that are pretty important now, there's seagrass layers. So instead of eelgrass, they're being labeled seagrass. DEP is the lead agency updating these. And so they're broken the coastline into 5 sections. So you'll see continually we'll be adding the updated seagrass sections as those are released. And I think those are the main ones to highlight, but there are quite a few that you can turn on and off here. So it's a really good resource to use, whether you're trying to see a site where you want to place one, or if you're trying to submit comment or learn more about sites in your areas. I'll see if I can navigate myself back to slides. All right, so that's just a screenshot, still shot of our web map. So the primary species that are farmed in Maine, oysters, salmon, some scallops, clams, urchins, marine algae, and mussels are the primary. So now I'm going to go through in more detail each of those 3 permit types. And we'll start with the LPAs, with the smallest sites. So for an LPA license, there's a quick overview of what the process looks like. The application is filled out, and before it can be submitted to DMR, the applicant needs to go and request some signatures. The primary one being to the town harbor master or a municipal official if there's no harbor master in that area. Then it can be submitted to DMR, and at the same time, it's the applicant's responsibility to also notify riparian landowners. Once DMR receives the application, we will send out a 2-week comment period to towns and lobster zone representatives, and then do our review, draft up the decision, and then notify the town if the license is issued in the town. And then at the end of each year, like I mentioned, the LPA licenses are going to expire. They're just an annual license. And so there is an annual renewal process. So if you want to continue your LPA to the next year, it's now an online application, and you can complete all your requirements through one link now, which is nice. And then at the end of that renewal period, we will issue a comment period for 2 weeks. And we notify towns when that comment period starts. So for any licenses that have been applied to be renewed, there is an annual review and comment period. When completing an LPA application, a couple of things to keep in mind. Make sure to conduct that riparian notice in advance of submitting your application. Be sure that all the gear fits within the boundaries within that 400 square feet area. It's a good idea too to seek out public input and give a heads up, kind of build that social license around your site. Also be sure that your application is being submitted with the signatures that are required. Applications being received without signatures right now will be denied. And also really important is to make sure you're using the current version of our forms. We're always working to improve our process and try to streamline our application process. And part of that is new versions of forms are getting posted. And so going to the website and seeing what the latest version of the application form that's posted on our website is important before you submit your application. Once an LPA license is issued, a couple of things to remind folks that the gear and the location cannot be changed. So there's no amendments for an LPA license midterm. They are renewed annually, and at that time, you could request limited changes to the license. And there's also an educational requirement which is built into the renewal process. So there's a quiz that's built into the renewal application now that is required for all LPA license holders. All right, so now we'll do a quick look at the experimental leases before we go on to standards. So for the overview of the experimental lease process, for leases, the applications are also housed on the website. An experimental lease gets submitted, and then once it's been deemed complete, there's a review process for all applications. It's sort of iterative. So DMR may go back and say, we need more information on this question, or we found a missing parcel on your riparian list, and we can go through some revision period. Once it's deemed complete, the applications really can't be modified. There's limited things that we could entertain as changes to the application at that point. Once it's deemed complete, we'll initiate a comment period. We notify the towns and the riparians and send out a gov delivery notice. After that, the DMR science team will conduct a site visit and write up their site report. And then if we don't get the requisite number of hearing requests, then it goes to the decision phase. But if during the comment period we get the requisite number of requests for a hearing, or there's also the DMR's discretion to hold a hearing, then a public hearing would be the next step. After either the hearing or after the comment period, the decision gets drafted and sent out for review to the parties, to the applicant, and then a final decision gets signed. There is a pause after the final decisions are signed, and notice of the decision goes to all the parties and the riparian owners of the final decision. And then the lease paperwork and the lease execution process is the last step for the experimental sites. And then last is the standard lease applications. They can be a little bit lengthier because they can be up to a 20-year lease term. So the review process for this has a few more steps involved. So before you can even submit your application to DMR, a pre-application meeting has to be held, and that is typically a member of the aquaculture division, the applicant, and then a town official. It's typically the harbor master. And those are conducted remotely. And then once the pre-application meeting has been conducted, the applicant can then submit their draft application for a standard lease. We'll review the application similar to the experimental phase, so it could be that revision period. Once the draft application is deemed complete, then the applicant can set up their scoping session. The applicant, excuse me, will post a notice in the newspaper and host the session. After their scoping session, the applicant then would fill out a final application form. One highlight here is that well, at the very end of 2024, so starting in 2025, we now have separate applications for draft and final applications for standard leases. And those are all posted on the website. So the final application will be filled out after a scoping session. We'll also have that phase where it could be reviewed back and forth. Once it's deemed complete, we'll send notice out to towns and any landowners and send out a gov delivery. And then the science team will conduct a site visit, site report, similar to the experimental process. All standards go to a public hearing. And so it's DMR who schedules those, unlike the scoping session. So we've sent out the notice for the public hearings and host the public hearings. And then after that, it's the decision phase. Those are all, and this last flow all aligns to the experimental process. So I won't go over those again, but they're ending with the lease application paperwork and execution process. For standard leases, once they're in place, there are other applications or options that you can apply to the agency for. So at the end of a lease term, you can apply to renew a standard lease. You can also apply for gear species amendments. You can apply after you've had the lease for 2 years. You can apply to expand the lease by whatever the maximum is, either 25% of the site or 4 acres, whichever is the smaller amount. And then you could apply to transfer the site. So now, oh, sorry, and then a couple things to keep in mind when you're completing the lease application. For the leases, important to think about who the audience for these applications are, right? It's not just this DMR or Army Corps. It's not just a federal or state agency reviewing these, right? The public is also going to be reading the application. So it's really important to write a thorough response to your questions and completely answer each question and think that potentially people who don't know a lot about how the sites operate will be reading these and wanting to understand what's being proposed. Use consistency in your naming of the gear or your naming of units of measurement. Be sure that all the gear is going to fit inside the boundaries of the site. Having legible any question that's handwritten, either the riparian list or any questions handwritten, make sure that they're legible. Also double checking your figures and your maps to make sure that those are clearly able to be read too. Double checking that you've gone through all the necessary addendums or renderings that are being asked for. So additional documents or attachments that are required for each application. And again, just like with the LPAs, being sure to double check the website and that you're using the current form that's posted online. And so here's our new highlight. We did post new standard and experimental applications. on December 31st, so really just the beginning of this year. And those applications uh, are tailored now to hopefully be a more streamlined version of it. So we've tried to put things in a table format where it fit. We try to use checkboxes when that was appropriate. We also have developed an instructions document for each application. So there's an example answer. There's more detailed description of what would be a complete answer and what we're looking for to go along with. But there are separate documents. So you'd have to go to the application page and open up the instructions PDF. And all of our applications now are fillable PDF format, hopefully to make that easier to complete. In addition to redesigning the standard and experimental applications, there was a rule change in 2024 that developed a new pathway that we're calling the conversion pathway. So the conversion application was developed and is posted now too. So I'll go into more about what a lease conversion pathway is. So this was developed for experimental leases where there's no proposed changes to that lease. So if it's just going to be a straight whatever I had as my experimental, I now want to have a standard because I'm using it for commercial purposes and it would expire after 3 years. You can make use of this conversion application. For the process of a conversion application, you still have to host the pre-application meeting first. The applicant will still be expected to host a scoping session once their draft application is deemed complete. And then after their scoping session, they would submit a final application. And once the final application is deemed complete, it would typically go to a comment period and then a final decision written. It's similar to the experimental pathway where if we had the requisite number of hearing requests during a comment period or at the department's discretion, we would host a hearing on those. And a site visit is also at DMR's discretion for this conversion pathway. There is still the operation extension clause similar to experimentals now that if your experimental is expiring, as long as you have either your standard application or your conversion application pending with the department, you can still operate your farm while the application is processing. And so that would apply to a conversion app as well. All the applications for leases are evaluated against decision criteria when we're writing up our decisions. So the main criteria are that the lease site would not interfere or unreasonably interfere with the ingress and egress of riparians. It wouldn't unreasonably interfere with navigation or fishing or other water-related uses. It wouldn't interfere with other aquaculture of the area or significant wildlife habitat or marine habitat, and it wouldn't interfere with public beaches, parks, or docks within 1,000 feet. For a standard lease, there's also a couple more criteria. So those criteria I just read off were for experimental leases and standard leases. And then in addition, standards also have criteria relating to sound, light, and visual impacts. And all leases are also evaluated for their source of organisms. Some of the common questions we get, probably the most common question we get is how long does it take to process a lease? On average right now, it's taking 3 years to process the standard leases from when the final application is getting deemed complete to when their final decision is signed. For experimentals, it's taking about probably 1.5 to 2 years to process from when the application is deemed complete to when the lease decision is signed for experimental sites. We also get asked what the public hearings are like, and they are a pretty prescribed and sort of unique meeting, I would say, because they have an almost court-like agenda to them, and they are a legal proceeding. So there's a hearings officer from DMR who is the facilitator for those hearings. An applicant typically presents what their proposal is, and then after the applicant provides testimony, that's another piece that makes it more like quasi judicial, is anyone providing testimony at a hearing is sworn in, and then they also have to be present for cross-examination. Then there's a period for other agencies, federal or state or towns, to submit testimony. And then there's also a period for registered members of the public to submit testimony. Another question we get a lot or see confusion around is whether or not an LPA is a lease. And so an LPA is not a lease, it is a license. So you would receive an LPA license or a standard lease or an experimental lease. So they are separate. An LPA is separate from that lease arm. And there are, like we went over, pretty big distinctions between what gets covered in a license versus a lease. But throughout all, I mean, a big part of aquaculture is being a public process, right? Our decision criteria all point to the common uses, overlapping uses of the water, and so that is all taken into consideration. There's also town input is sought out in several places during the application process. Landowners within 1,000 feet of a lease site are receiving direct notice. We also directly notify other state agencies when applications are deemed complete. There's comment periods and hearings to solicit the information and get that testimony or that evidence on the record. And if you're curious to hear more about the participation aspects, because I was focused more on applications today, the participation website link is here. And there's a good overview of the different types of applications and the parts and where comment or testimony are sought out. And with that, I can pause and take questions. I also wanted to let folks know if after this there's questions, the best way to contact the division is through our general account, which is dmraquaculture@maine.gov. And if you want to learn more, I highlighted the web map, but there are a lot of other really great tools on our website, which is maine.gov/dmr/aquaculture.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I do have a question.
Yeah.
What is the most common mistake on a standard lease application?
Oh, good question. We don't really track track things in that way. I guess what comes to mind is probably a missing parcel on a riparian list is a pretty common thing that we see. We are working on developing a layer that would help build that buffer more automatically, because right now we have a manual of instructions on that aquaculture web map. It's part of the Maine Administrative Procedures Act that we have to notify the riparians, and this notification has to happen a certain way. So we really are real sticklers on making sure that 1,000-foot buffer is applied, and that we're getting notice to every landowner that should be notified. So I would say that the riparian lists get applications kicked back pretty commonly. That's the one that came to mind first.
Yeah, thanks. We have a few more questions from folks attending. First one, is that 3-year processing time the same for new experimental lease to standard lease conversions?
The conversions we actually don't have any data on yet because we just launched it. So I'm not sure. That's a great question. What would the average time for those? The goal is for it to be shorter because it's meant to be a streamlined pathway.
Okay. Next question. This is related to my first question. What are the most common reasons that an experimental lease would be rejected? At what stage does the application see the most obstacles?
Certainly I mean, we're not going to deem an application complete and kind of sort of like kick off the rest of that process until we've gone through this iterative review and made sure, especially for experimentals, because they're going to comment period, and we wouldn't have further time, like to say during a hearing, in most cases, to get any more evidence on the record. So I would say that's that from that initial submission to during that review process before it gets deemed complete, like that's probably the time where you're going to see an application kicked back. Once it's deemed complete, it's going to go through the process, and the final the decision phase would be the phase where we can grant a site with modifications, or grant it as applied, or deny. So those are the three options I would say at the end phase, once an application for any lease is deemed complete.
Yeah. And what would you say? Are they similar to the standard lease with missing, riparians? Is that a common mistake for experimental leases also?
Yeah, both lease applications see pretty similar, because we're asking pretty similar questions on them. Yeah, we don't track that information necessarily, but I would say that getting that 1,000-foot buffer array is probably common for experimentals as well.
All right.
I just want to add something off of the 1,000-foot buffer. Is there a way to use like a DMR tool to determine where the 1,000-foot buffer is? So when you're applying, you can make sure that that is included in your application?
Yes, that's a great question. So the web map can offer that. Right now, it's a measurement tool that you're doing manually, but our science team is working on making it into a buffer layer that could be like a layer, like I was showing, you could click on and off, that would automatically add the buffer around your coordinates. So that's in the works. But right now, you could manually, there's a measurement tool on our aquaculture web map that you can do you can like zoom into your site and take the line. And if you go into, when you're on the web map, in the paragraph above the web map, there's a hyperlink to an instructions form, and that walks applicants through how to use the measurement tool there.
Awesome. When is the LPA application deadline?
So well, for the renewals, it's November 30th if you already have an existing site. If you're applying for a new site, there's no deadline. We kind of take rolling applications on LPAs for a new site. Okay.
So this next question is about the length of time it takes to get a lease. So I'm going to rephrase the question a little bit. What's DMR doing to help reduce the length of time that it takes to get a lease?
Yeah, good question. We've gone through a lot of recent developments. I mean, a big one was the application redesign. There's been some rule changes, like I highlighted with the streamlined conversion pathway. Staffing up has been a big one. We're staffed at capacity now, but we're always asking for more positions to keep adding capacity there. I'm really hopeful that with the application redesign, we can trim down that revision time and hope that questions are completely filled out the first go around, and that will trim some time off. It's hard to know like what's the goal. Like there's folks who can give you kind of when application volume was lower times, but now we have pretty high application volume, and there is a line and backup of applications right now. But there are natural pauses built into the system. So I don't know, what we keep working on getting things streamlined as much as possible and getting those processing times back down. But I think there will always be, like for leases, like over a year process probably.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Let's see. What is the preferred format for the attached maps for the lease applications? Is it better to print a map of the area with the lease highlighted and information neatly filled in, or do applicants draw their maps by hand?
We see applications both ways. I think it's fine. It doesn't necessarily have to be a digitized version. If you are going to handwrite the coordinates in, just making sure that they're legible. But either format is accepted.
Okay. So this question says, can you speak to the timeline for an amendment to a full lease? Which I'm assuming that means like till it's accepted. Does that make sense?
Oh, I would say for all those optional like things that you want to change on a standard lease, the amendment, the transfer, the renewal and expansion applications time, on average, I think it's around 8 months right now. I don't have the numbers broken out by each of those individual 4 types.
Right. These are all great questions. How many full and experimental leases do the state have backlogged right now?
Oh, I didn't pull those numbers. I don't know right now how many pending applications there are, but that is a good question. Sorry.
I just saw Cole present at the RD&E Summit, and she was saying that the number that you processed last year was the amount that came in. So it's if there weren't the backlog. So that's kind of a good accomplishment. All right. Any other questions? We've gotten through all the ones in our Q&A, but we'll give it a minute just to see if anyone else is typing in questions, or if any of our folks have questions too. Feel free to jump in. All right.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa.
Oh, wait.
Oh, do we have a question?
We have another one.
Yay!
This is about the natural pause you were talking about. The natural pause is built in. So what's a natural pause is the first part of the question. The second part is, does the type of aquaculture being farmed or the species farmed affect the licensing time?
Oh, okay. So for the pause, what I was indicating, like, so for example, like a comment period, we can't change or streamline that anymore. So like there has to be a 30-day pause on those. And then what was the second question again?
The second part was, does the species farmed affect the licensing time?
Oh, the time to process an application? No, typically, yeah, the applications are coming in and are processed in the order they're received.
Brilliant. Okay. More questions. Are there third-party site inspectors, or is that all in-house DMR staff?
The inspection program is all through DMR staff, yes.
Okay. How far in advance should I begin the renewal process for an existing LPA?
So there's a window where the renewal application is open. And I'm trying to remember when it starts. I know the deadline's November 30th. I can't remember. I want to say October 1st is when we send it out. We send out quite a few notices. So if you're a license holder, you'll receive an email or a Gov delivery notice that tells you when the application for renewal is open. But it's every fall. There's going to be a limited window where that application, yeah, like I said, it's all an online form now. So when that form is open.
Right. Okay. That's all the questions we have for now. We'll go slow to the end in case.
Yeah, exactly. I was almost like, I'm not sure we should quite finish because somebody might drop some more questions, which we do encourage. We love getting lots of questions. So just give folks another minute in case they're typing them out right now. But thank you so much, Lisa. This was a really useful presentation. One question that I would also have in relation to the presentation is, do you see on the horizon upcoming like more changes to the leasing and licensing process that somebody watching this webinar in the future? So today's date is January 17th, 2025. So at what point would somebody really need to keep in mind checking some updated resources with regards to the leasing and licensing process?
That's a great question. I don't know of anything major in the works right now, but we are always looking to improve. We also have an advisory council that can make recommendations, and they're kind of taking a look at some of the application processes now. So I wouldn't rule it out, but there's nothing in the works right now. The biggest thing I think is to check the versions of the application forms posted on the website. We'll probably be updating those, especially since we just did the redesign and have the instructions out, and I want to make sure that they're as clear to applicants as possible.
We did have one more question pop up. So this is about the transfers. So someone asked if licenses or approvals are transferable if a business is sold. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so here's where terms really, really come into play. So license refers just to the LPA sites. So LPAs cannot be transferred. If it's for a lease site, for a standard lease site, there is a transfer application process. Does that answer?
Yeah, yep.
What's the time length on a transfer application?
I don't have it broken out for just that specific application type, but in combination with expansions, renewals, and amendments, it's about 8 months right now.
Okay. Great. Emily, I think we had another question from our team, actually, so I can put that one out. Is there a formal mediation or process for complaints if someone objects to an LPA or operations at a site?
So all of the comment period, like if you want to get your evidence or your comment on the record, it has to be taken during a comment period for an LPA. And then that gets incorporated into the decision that's written for the license site.
We do have a couple more questions. One is, actually, I'm going to answer this question.
Oh, thanks.
One is related to climate changes affecting aquaculture, but you should email me because I have lots of, Maya, will you put my email in the the chat for everyone? The question was about what climate changes are affecting aquaculture in Maine. We just ran a survey to ask that, so I'm happy to talk about that. This other question, it says, can you speak to upwellers, tumblers, and bottle upwellers? I don't know if we need more specifics to answer that question. Does that?
In terms of licensing them or getting, so.
Yeah, if you were the one to ask this question, if you could give us a little bit more context, that would be helpful.
I would guess until we get more confirmation that it's probably in relation to if you're going to have, if your business plan includes any of that type of equipment, how would you go about getting a lease that is approving that? Like, is it the same? Is it different? Is it listed under equipment?
Right. It would, so your application is going to serve as your operational plan. So it's really important to outline and think in advance of what types of gear or equipment you're going to have on site. And then anything you're going to be using out there also needs to be within the boundaries of your site. So yeah, if you want to have a float or if you want to have upweller, tumbler, or anything like that, putting that into your proposal. So there's an operations section where you can outline what all that gear is. There's also a gear table you would outline gear that's going to stay on site all the time. If it's for an LPA license, it's similar. Like you're gonna outline all the gear that you're going to use. We just have categories on LPA licenses, so you would check off which gear category you're going to have on your site.
Excellent. A few more questions coming in. Does the application process favor parties who have been granted licenses or leases previously, relative to someone completely new to aquaculture who hasn't applied before?
No, we take, I mean, the way the review, I mean, any application is taken at face value. And the way the review process is going is that when applications are submitted, they're taken in the order they're received. So there's not like a separate line of like, this has an existing farm or this is a new farm.
Right. Do you have to wait the full 3 years of an experimental lease term before applying for a conversion, or can you apply for that at any time after it's granted?
So there, the uh, the legal language is that we have to receive the conversion application or the standard lease application before the expiration of the experimental. There's not really language saying how soon into it, but I guess that might be a personal call of like, have I figured out my operations well enough to be able to fill out a standard lease application or a conversion application completely?
Yeah, but you could get your experimental lease and then instantly apply for the conversion right after.
Yeah, I can't think of anything barring you from getting that process going on our end, at least, other than we're going to ask more detailed questions about the operations, and you might be locked into something that you don't want if you go through it too soon, I guess.
Yeah.
One question kind of building off of that I would have is there, so the experimental is a 3-year, correct? Versus standard, which can be up to 20. If somebody got an experimental lease, and then wanted to move up to a standard lease, but they didn't apply within those 3 years, would they have to stop all operations in between? Or would they be able to continue if the lease hadn't been processed yet or something?
Yeah, that's important to get your application in before your lease expires.
Okay.
You have to submit it 30 days before the expiration date of your experimental site. If you let it lapse and the experimental does expire, then yeah, you would have to remove gear and wait while that process takes place for the standard. If you get it in while there's that overlap before the expiration date, then that extension clause kicks in and you're able to continue operations while your standard is in process.
Okay, thank you.
I have one other specific question. So someone that's watching is still working on an incomplete experimental lease. Is there a deadline for resubmitting if it's taking them a little bit longer to make the corrections?
No, they can submit the revised experimental lease application when it's ready.
Great. Okay. Last call for questions. We'll do one more fake goodbye and then we'll.
I think this has been a record for us, Lisa, actually, with the number of questions. So thank you to our very active and engaged audience participants. We
and
love
I'll also
having lots
note
of
we'll have a
questions.
table at Fisherman's Forum too. So if more application questions come up,
Amazing.
we'll be there Friday.
So, and the Fisherman's Forum, if you look that up online, you should be able to find the information, and it's at the end of February, I believe. So 27, 28, and March 1st, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And that's in Rockland.
Correct.
Okay.
Or Rockport, but yeah.
Rockport, thank you. Yeah. I'm sure that is important to distinguish for somebody there. So, all right. I think we might, dare I say it, have exhausted our question supply, maybe. That was a really informative and helpful webinar. Thank you so much, Lisa. Your contact info I know was on your last slide, but I can also, can people find that as well on the DMR website? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
DMR aquaculture@maine.gov is the general email.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So thank you to all of our participants for attending. If you have follow-up questions or additional things you'd like to discuss, please reach out to either MAIC or to the DMR Aquaculture email that Lisa just mentioned. we'll be sending this webinar out as a recording too. So if you know people who you think would like to watch it, please feel free to forward that onto them. And we look forward to seeing you at multiple events in the future. And until then, thank you so much, Lisa. Round of applause to you. We're very grateful
Thanks for
and
having me.
hope everyone has a good rest of their afternoon and a good weekend.